Chaim again. So before the bris, we're taught that the parents are inspired with a special level of Ruach HaKodesh when they choose the name for their son. Because a person's name isn't just an interesting title you want to give him, but it actually represents the neshama of the person. And that's why we're told that we need to be very careful when giving a name. We try to give a name after a tzaddik, after a righteous person, after a family member, but we choose somebody who we inspire to be like, who we look up to.
I'm actually named after Yisrael Baal Shem Tov.
Oh, wonderful. Right? So with the same name, you get a little bit of his characteristics. So it would seem very strange that this week's Parsha... What?
He's the hidden part.
Oh, okay. I thought it was hidden until 36, so you have some time. So this week's Parsha is the only Parsha in the Torah which is named after not some big tzaddik or some righteous individual, but it's named after a very wicked person who tried to curse the Jewish people. All right, Parshas Balak. Now, of course, his curses didn't end up working out. It ended up being transformed into blessings. But it seems a bit strange that we named the Parsha after such a wicked person. And there are many explanations that are given that because his blessings or his curses were transformed into blessings, so even his name represents the idea that even bad things can be transformed into good. But it still seems a bit strange that we're calling the Parsha by this name, by the name Balak. Furthermore, if we want to name it after the fact that the curses were transformed into blessings, we could have called it Bilam. Right? He's the one who actually gave the curses, who actually gave the blessings. So why do we give this name Balak? And there are many different answers that are given. Today we're going to focus on the explanation given by the Oyev Yisrael, by the After of Rabbi Mishua Heschel of After. So we're all familiar with the story of the Gentile who approaches Hillel Hazakin, and he tells him, I would like to become a Jew, but I see that you guys spend all your day learning Torah, and I don't know much Torah, and I want you to teach me the entire Torah really quickly while I stand here on one foot.
Okay, that's easy.
So what does Hillel tell him, Yossi?
No. First, wait.
He says, don't do to other people what you don't want other people to do to you. Right? That's the base, that's the foundation of the entire Torah. Everything else is just commentary.
Yeah.
And Mendel Futterfass used to tell the story that when he was learning in Cheder, when he was 5 years old, and he was, I guess, younger than 5 years old, when he was first 3-4 years old, when he was learning Aleph Beis in Cheder. So he says
Aleph Beis.
Yes, learn Aleph Beis in Cheder. What age were you when you learned the Aleph Beis?
Like 3.
Okay, maybe he was 3. So he was in Cheder learning the Aleph Beis, and in those days you didn't have pencils or pens. They had quills, and they had to get ink, and I'm not sure exactly what they used, but they had to bring like ink and quills separately. And one of the boys in the class forgot to bring his ink bottle. Right? He had his quill, but he didn't have ink, or maybe he ran out of ink. And he turned to his friend. He turned to the boy next to him, and he asked him, "Can I borrow some ink? I see you have a bottle full of ink. Can I borrow some of your ink?" And his friend says, "No, my ink, not yours. It's my ink." Okay, so he goes to somebody else. He goes to another child and gets the ink. But the teacher noticed what was going on, and the teacher turns to the second boy, the boy who didn't want to give the ink, and he says, "Can you tell me what an aleph is? What is an aleph?" So the boy smiles. He's very quick. He already learned aleph. He points. He gets up. He points to the aleph on the board. He says, "This is the aleph." He says, "No, you're wrong. Can you tell me what is a base?" Again, the boy is a little confused now, but maybe he mixed up the aleph, but he knows the base. So he gets up and he points to the base on the board, and he says, "This is a base." So the teacher says, "No, you're wrong. Can you tell me what the gimel is?" So he's very a little nervous now. He's a little confused, and he said, "I think this is a gimel." And the teacher says, "No, this is not an aleph. This is not a base. This is not a gimel. You know what an aleph is? The aleph of Judaism, the aleph of Yiddishkeit, is that when your friend asks you for ink, you give him ink. The base of Yiddishkeit is that when your friend asks you for ink, you give him ink. And the gimel is also when your friend asks you for ink, you give him ink. Right? This is the foundation of Torah, the foundation of Yiddishkeit. Now, what does it mean? It's the foundation. This is the aleph base, the foundation of Torah. So this means that there are many times when the Torah contains within itself 613 mitzvahs. Right? And there are some times that different mitzvahs will conflict with each other. And there are many times that we want to do, we have some mitzvahs that we want to do, some beautiful mitzvahs that we want to do. But unfortunately, doing these mitzvahs will interfere with our ahavas Yisrael, with our relationship with other people. And that's why we're told that Ahavas Yisrael is the foundation. That's the klal gadol b'Torah, as Rabbi Akiva says. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, the story is told by Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. It's also, I heard it told by the Chavetz Chaim. Different versions of the story, maybe it happened to both of them, but the most common retelling is about Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. He was once invited to some meal in the home of some very rich person, and before the meal, everybody went to wash. And everybody washes their hands. And of course, how do you wash your hands before the meal? Can you show me how you wash your hands?
3 times.
3 times on your right, 3 times on your left, right? Rabbi Yisrael got up, and instead of washing 3 times, he washed once on his right side and once on his left side.
There's room for that in halacha, actually.
What?
There's room for that, I think, in halacha.
There's certainly room for that in halacha. You can do it once. You could do it twice. 3 times is an extra stringency. Certainly, if you're doing a revius at no time, you can do just 1 time. But the common custom is to be strict and do it 3 times. Some people do it twice. Some people do it 3 times. But halachically, you only have to do it once. And Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, of course, was known for going out of his way to fulfill the mitzvahs in the best possible way. Some of his students were a little surprised. Why is their teacher only washing his hands once? And they kept quiet, but after the meal, they asked him. They said, Rebbe, why did you only wash your hands once? So he says, do you know how does the water get here? Now, in those days, didn't have plumbing. You could turn on the faucet and water comes out. You have to go down to the well and bring a bucket of water and bring it to your house to use. And he says, do you know how the water gets here? He says, yeah, the rich man has a servant, an elderly widow who goes to the well and fills up the water. And he says, so why should I make her work harder so that I could get an extra mitzvah? Right? Should she have to carry extra water just because I want it? Should she have to work hard? Should I make her work hard so that I can do an extra mitzvah? No, I'm going to do the basic mitzvah, which is to wash my hands once. And that's what he did. Another story is told of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. He was once walking on the street on Erev Yom Kippur. And he saw Beryl walking down the street. And Beryl was very inspired. He knew Yom Kippur was coming up, and he wanted to properly prepare himself for Yom Kippur. He was ready a couple of weeks before from Rosh Chodesh Elul. He started getting ready for Yom Kippur. And in Erev Yom Kippur, he decided that he's going to do a Tainis Dibur. Anybody know what a Tainis Dibur is?
I'm very not sure how you do that.
A Tainis Dibur is that you accept upon yourself not to talk anything that's not anything that's unnecessary. You only talk words of Torah and words of prayer.
I know someone does it every Shabbos, you know that?
Wonderful. Amazing.
Not too amazing, actually.
Well, we're going to learn why it's not too amazing in a minute, but there are certain positive aspects to it. And he felt that this is a very holy way a holy thing to do in Erev Yom Kippur. So Rabbi Yisrael Salanter is walking down the street. He sees Beryl, and he says, "Good Yom Tov, Beryl." And Beryl like looks at him and is like, So Rabbi Yisrael realized what was going on. He said to him, he said, Beryl, is it my fault that you decided to be frum? Right? Just because you decided to be frum, why is that my fault? Right? Your tiniest dibur shouldn't be at the expense of greeting another Jew. Another Jew greets you. Right? It's very nice to do a tiniest dibur. If your friends are sitting around gossiping, it's a great time to do a tiniest dibur. But when a fellow Jew meets you in the street and tells you good Shabbos, that's not the right time to do a tiniest dibur. And even though, a tiniest dibur is a beautiful thing, make you holy, separate you from the world, bring you closer to Hashem. But you know what? Greeting your fellow Jew is a much better way to make yourself holy and bring yourself closer to Hashem. Rabbi Daniel Frisch is the author of the Sefer Masik Midvash. It's a commentary on the Zohar. He was once in Przeworsk. It's a small town in Poland. And he came into shul in the morning to daven. And he was greeted by the tzaddik Rabbi Yankel of Przeworsk, who was at that time a young man. And he was going around greeting people. He sees some guests in town. He's going around greeting the guests. And he asked them if they would like something to drink. They want a coffee. And Rabbi Daniel Frisch was a little surprised. Before davening, you're not allowed to talk. Shulchan Aruch says you're not allowed to talk before davening. And this guy's going around greeting everybody, offering them coffee. So he tells him, he says, don't you know that, he says to him, don't you know you're not supposed to talk before davening? And Rabbi Yankel smiles at him. And he says, well, don't you know that the Arizal writes that before davening, it's a mitzvah for a person to accept upon himself the mitzvah of Yahavta l'reacha kamaycha. We say every day before davening, Hareini mekabel alai mitzvah saseh. Do you think that means you just have to say the words? No, you actually have to do something about it. You have to go around greeting your fellow Jew. That's how you prepare for davening. Right? So, Chaim.
You have some ice in the Chaim. Make it back. Mm-hmm.
Another story that told Rabbi Yankel of Przeworsk, this is many years later, after the war when he was in Antwerp.
Actually, the truck.
So,
Casamigo's truck says, does he like on the rocks? Join us.
Chaim.
Hey.
So,
Come join us. We have a seat right here for you.
So Rabbi Yankel of Przeworsk was visiting.
In perfect time with it. We had a class.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, come.
He would go around in Antwerp when of course, it's a big mitzvah to visit sick people. So he would go around the hospitals there visiting, elderly Jews who were sick and were in the hospital that didn't have much family. He would go around visiting them. So one Chol HaMoed Sukkos, he went to the hospital to visit an elderly Jew, Shimon. Shimon was in the hospital, and he went up to one of the top floors of the hospital over there to visit him. And as he's about to walk into the room, Shimon's wife comes out and says, Rabbi, Shimon doesn't know that it's Sukkot today, right? Please don't tell him, because otherwise he's going to start looking around for a sukkah. It's not possible for him to eat in a sukkah. Right? So don't mention anything. You don't need to tell him that it's sukkahs. Right? Okay. So Rabbi Yankel goes inside, and Shimon's face lights up. Oh, the rabbi's here. He quickly pulls out an apple. He says, Rabbi, can I offer you something to eat? Here, take an apple. And Rabbi Yankel's like, it's fine. I'm not hungry right now. No, you gotta make a bracha. You gotta honor me by making a bracha in my room, eating something. And he's like, it's fine. I'm not hungry. No, Rabbi, before we start, you gotta make a bracha. And he hands him the apple. So Rabbi Yankel picks up the apple. He makes ha'etz and he eats the apple. His shamish who's standing next to him, his mouth drops open. He can't believe what he's seeing. He keeps quiet, but he waits till they get out of the room, and he says, Rebbe, what's going on? Eating outside of a sukkah? And he says, well, according to halacha, you only need to go into a sukkah if you're eating something which is bread or something made out of the 5 grains. Only something that's mezainis or amaitzi. An apple you're allowed to eat outside of the sukkah. He says, yes, of course you're allowed to eat an apple outside of the sukkah, but you were in Siberia, and I know how much Mesiras Nefesh you went through not to drink water outside of a sukkah. Right? It was extremely difficult there, and you endangered your life to drink water in a sukkah. Are you eating an apple outside of a sukkah? So he says, to endanger my own life for a mitzvah, that's okay. But to hurt another Jew, to make another Jew upset, and I don't have to, for an extra mitzvah, that's not something I'm willing to do. So of course, it's beautiful to eat apple in the sukkah, drink water in the sukkah, but if it's going to come at the expense of another Jew, and where it's not maybe not a big expense, but he's going to be upset, right? As we said, he's going to be upset. He can't go to a sukkah. It's going to bother him. So why should I do an extra mitzvah at the expense of another person? And this is something that we need to think about, right? We're always trying to improve, to go higher and elevate our service of Hashem, to serve Hashem on a higher level. So we have to be very, very careful that our extra mitzvahs, our extra chumras that we accept upon ourselves shouldn't be on somebody else's cheshbon, shouldn't be at the expense of somebody else. As holy as we might think we are, getting these extra mitzvahs, it should never be at somebody else's expense. Rabbi Yehuda Segal was the Rosh Yeshiva in Manchester. But when he was younger, he was a bacher, he was learning in yeshiva. So his roommate noticed that every night before he went to sleep, he would... Yossi, what do you do before you go to sleep? What do you prepare for the next morning? You say Shema, of course. What do you need to prepare for the next morning?
Negelwasser.
Negelwasser, right? So he would take a little cup, fill it up with water, and where do you put the Negelwasser, Yossi?
In front of your bed.
Right next to your bed. But Yehuda Segal, instead of putting the Negelwasser next to his bed, he put it right outside of his room. So his roommate is confused, a little confused. What are you putting it outside of the room? So he, you're supposed to, halachically, you're not supposed to walk 4 cubits before you wash your hands. Now, there are different opinions. According to some opinions, the entire room or even the entire house is considered 4 cubits. It means you shouldn't go outside without Negelwasser. But the common practice is that we try not to walk at all. We don't even, put our feet down on the ground before we wash Negelwasser. So why are you putting the water outside of the room? So he asks him, he says, why are you putting the water outside of the room? So he says, well, I'm going to get up tomorrow at 4:30 in the morning to learn. I don't want to start washing my hands and waking up all my roommates, right? Why should I want to get up early and learn, but should that be at the expense of other people? I want to wash Negelwasser right next to my bed. But if there's any chance that that'll harm one of my roommates, then I would prefer to rely on the lenient opinion and wash Negelwasser outside of my room and not take a chance that I might wake somebody else up. The Apter of Rabbi Avraham Yeshua Heschel of Apter, who was known for his tremendous Avas Yisrael. He wrote a sefer called Oyev Yisrael. And he was very, very careful before Pesach. He had of course, before Pesach was a very special time. He would spend a lot of time preparing for Pesach. And he would personally go down to the field and cut the wheat for the matzah. He would go out. He would have somebody who would watch the wheat the entire time. This was a process that began a long time before Pesach, a couple of weeks or maybe even months before Pesach. They would have somebody watching the matzah in the field. It's something that we all do. But the Rebbe himself would go down to the field, cut the wheat. He would grind the wheat, and he would actually go through the process of preparing the matzah. This was a lot of work involved. But this was for Pesach. He wanted to make sure that everything was done properly. And he would prepare 3 matzahs, which he would use for the first Seder. He wouldn't do this for all the matzahs, Pesach. That would be, a little bit more difficult. But he would prepare 3 matzahs that he would make for the Seder. He would go through the whole process himself, from the cutting of the wheat all the way until the matzah was baked. He would do everything on his own, and he would make sure everything was done properly. And, of course, there were special prayers that he would say before. There were special kavanahs, different Kabbalistic secrets that he would imbue into these matzahs. These were very special matzahs. And one year, on Erev Pesach, it was a few hours before Yom Tov, and there was a knock on the door of his house. So the Rebbe's wife opens the door, and she sees a poor person at the door, and he wants to know if they have any matzahs for him. Right? So the Rebbe would distribute matzahs before Pesach for people. And the Rebbe's wife, as you could imagine, a couple hours before Yom Tov, is extremely busy and doesn't really have time to think about what she's doing. So she grabs the first 3 matzahs she finds and she hands it to this poor person, who takes it and walks off. And an hour later, as she's setting the table, she realizes that her husband's matzahs are gone. Right? The matzahs that the Rebbe spent days preparing, with all imbuing with all the special, holy, spiritual kavanas, the spiritual secrets that he was thinking about, are gone. What's she going to do? She's going to go and tell him now that she accidentally gave his matzahs to some unknown poor person? Who knows how it is? So she figures, maybe he won't notice. So she takes three regular matzahs and she sticks it into his Seder plate. Hopefully he won't notice. Right? They're around the same size, they look the same. It's not,
There's no spices inside.
Right? It's flour and water. They all look the same. She puts regular matzahs there. Okay, the Seder comes and she's getting very nervous. It's coming time to open the matzahs. She's trembling, and her husband, washes his hands. He picks up the matzahs and he makes the bracha and he eats. He doesn't say anything. Everything goes well. Wow, it worked, she says. Great. After Pesach, a couple of days after Pesach, this young couple comes in and they need to speak to the Rebbe. They have a big problem. They need some marriage counseling. Right? The husband's very angry at his wife, and he says to the Rebbe, "That's it. I don't want to be married to her anymore. I want to divorce my wife." Why? What happened? And he says, I'm very careful in my house. We're very careful for shruya, not to eat matzah that became wet, right? The matzah has to stay dry. We want to keep matzah separated from anything else. We don't want the matzah to be wet. And my wife comes from a family where they weren't careful with shruya, right? Many Jews don't have the custom to do that. And when we got married, I made it very clear to her that in my house, absolutely not. We don't use shruya in our house. And I told her how important it is to me and how careful she needs to be with it. And I told her, if she wants to eat shruya, she has her family comes over, they eat shruya. She has to keep separate dishes for the gebrats and the non-gebrats dishes. And I noticed over Pesach she wasn't being careful. She was mixing up the dishes, and I told her you got to be careful with it. I told her once, twice, 3 times, and she still didn't listen to me. Rabbi, I can't be married to somebody who doesn't respect my minhagim, my customs. So the Rebbe says to him, it's very nice. You have beautiful, beautiful customs. I also have some very interesting customs for Pesach. Do you know the length I go to prepare my matzahs for the Seder? And he says, of course, everybody knows the Rebbe spends, days before Pesach going to the field, cutting the wheat, going through the whole process of preparing the matzah. I'm sure the Rebbe who has such astringencies in his own matzahs, I'm sure you can respect how much it means to me when my wife doesn't respect my chumras, my customs. So he says, okay. He opens the door. He calls in the Rebbitzin. He says, Rebbitzin, come in here. Maybe you could tell our guests what matzahs I ate on the first night of Pesach. The Rebbitz's face turns red, and she's like, she's sitting there. She doesn't want to say anything. And they was like, don't worry, you can tell them. It's all fine. It's okay. So the Rebbitzin starts mumbling, it was a terrible mistake. I was in a big rush, Erev Pesach, and a poor person came in. She says over the whole story. And how she switched the matzahs, and how the Rebbe didn't say anything. So the Rebbe looks at his guest and he says, I spent days on those matzahs. Okay? But when my wife brought me regular matzahs, I had enough seichel to keep quiet and not to make a big deal, right? Not to start a fight over it. So if I could eat regular matzahs on Pesach, I'm sure it's okay for you to use the same vessels that your wife's family used for matzah shrui, right? That's okay. So the Dr. Rav used to teach his students that every single portion in the Torah, right, as we said before, the foundation of the entire Torah is Ahavas Yisrael. And he taught his students that every portion of the Torah that you learn, every word in the Torah, every verse in the Torah, every chapter, every portion is teaching us this underlying lesson, how we have to love our fellow Jew. And he taught his students that you can open any portion in the Torah, no matter what it's talking about, and you'll find a lesson connected to Ahavas Yisrael. As a matter of fact, he wrote his book, his commentary on the Torah, he called Oyev Yisrael, the lover of the Jewish people. So he was once telling this to his students that any portion of the Torah that you open up to, you'll find it's the focus of the entire portion is how you have to love your fellow Jew. So one of his Hasidim says, what about this week? It's Parshas Balak, right? Parshas Balak this week. It speaks about how Balak hired Bilam to curse the Jewish people. He ended up blessing them. It doesn't seem to have much of a connection to the mitzvah of Ahavas Yisrael. I mean, you could find some little hints over there. There's Matoivo Alecha Yaakov. There's one verse that speaks about how the Jews, respect each other when they live together. But most of the parsha doesn't seem to talk about that. So how can you say the focus of the entire portion is on the mitzvah of Ahavas Yisrael? So the Rebbe looks at him and he's surprised. He says, "I don't understand. You chose the portion of Balak. You're challenging me from the portion of Balak." Look at the name of the parsha. The name of the parsha is Balak, right? Balak is spelled Beis Lamed Kuf. That's an Rosh Tevis. That's an acronym for V'ahavta l'reacha kamaycha. You have to love your neighbor as yourself. So the Chassid's not very impressed, and he says, Rebbe, V'ahavta is spelled with a Vav, not with a Vez, right? It's learn how to spell your words over here, right? And kamaycha is spelled with a kuf, not with a kuf, right? The lamed is good, but the first and last letter are misspelled, right? They're similar, right? A kuf and a kuf make the same sound, and a vez and a vav are similar, but
you have points for trying.
but it's not spelled correctly. So the Rebbe says, so you have to. So that's exactly what the Torah is teaching us. He says the Torah is telling us not only do you have to love your fellow Jew, the Torah is telling you the secret behind it. The Torah is teaching you that if you want to succeed in really loving your fellow Jew and really getting along with everybody, the way to do it, the Torah is teaching you a lesson. And he said it in Yiddish, that if you want to truly succeed in the mitzvah of Ahavas Yisrael, ken men nit medaktik zayin if the right? You can't be, you can't get caught up in the strict letter of the law, in nitpick over every single misspelling. If you want to truly succeed in Ahavas Yisrael, right? Of course, we all want to follow every single letter in the Torah, right? But the Torah is teaching us that sometimes we have to be willing to eat regular matzahs for Ahavas Yisrael. Sometimes we even need if our wife uses vessels that are matzah shruya, we have to be willing to do that as well. Sometimes we might even have to eat an apple outside of a sukkah in order to get along with another Jew, in order to make another Jew happy. And that's the lesson that the Torah is teaching us. So this is something that we all... What? It's not the Raisa, that's right. It's extra stringency. So yeah. So you have to realize what's important. It's true. We want to follow every single letter in the Torah. But you know what? If somebody spells a vase with a vav with a vase, a kuf with a kuf, when it comes to Ahavas Yisrael, we have to be able to overlook the slight typos and misspellings that exist. We have to be ready not to nitpick every little detail. And to conclude, and you have to really sometimes to compromise a little bit on you're trying to live a holy life, but you have to be willing sometimes to compromise your holiness, right? Your extra holiness in order to help another Jew and make another Jew happy.
Can be holier than thou.
And to conclude with a final story, with Rabbi Avram Ganachovsky. He was the Rosh Yeshiva of the Trebiner Yeshiva in Yerushalayim. And he was in Bnei Brak once for a simcha, and he had to travel back to Yerushalayim. And he was looking for, a way to get back. And one of the students in the yeshiva, Chaim, one of the students in the yeshiva, offered Rosh Yeshiva to give him a ride. Right? Now, why did he offer to give him a ride? First of all, it's a big merit to give the Rosh Yeshiva a ride. But furthermore, it would give him time. He would have, 45 minutes to spend with the Rosh Yeshiva. He prepared a bunch of questions, a bunch of Torah topics that he would discuss with the Rosh Yeshiva while they were driving. Okay? So he comes, he picks up the Rosh Yeshiva, and they start driving towards Yerushalayim. And as they're leaving the city, as they're leaving Bnei Brak, Rabbi Avram notices Baruch and his wife Chana. Baruch was a baker who lived in Yerushalayim, and they're standing on the side of the road. They're trying to hitch a ride. So, he rolls down the window. He asks them if they need a ride to Yerushalayim. Yeah, of course. Welcome. Come inside. There's some room in the back of the car. So, Baruch and Chana come in. And Chaim, who's driving, he turns to Rosh Yeshiva, he has all his questions prepared. He says, we were learning in the Gemara last week about this and this. And Rosh Yeshiva says, one second. He turns to the back and he turns to Baruch the baker, and he says, Baruch, I heard you opened a new donut shop recently. Yeah, Baruch Hashem, but things are going well. But good parnasa, a lot of customers. So the Rosh Yeshiva says to him, I always wondered, when you make the donuts, when you make the jelly donuts, when do you put in the jelly? Do you put it before you fry the donuts or afterwards? So he says, well, if you can't put it in before, if the jelly hits the hot oil, it could explode. And first of all, also, it could stop the dough from cooking properly. It'll explode. It'll come out. What?
No, you can't. You can't put this.
So you disagree with Baruch, but Baruch the baker says that you can't.
He opened a couple donut shops.
So he says, no, you can't put it in before. You got to put it in afterwards. Right? If you put it in before, it could explode. It can leak out into the oil. Lots of problems can come out of it. It also might not bake properly. You got to do it afterwards. So the Rebbe says, afterwards, but the donut's already formed. How do you get the jelly inside the donut after it's already formed? So he says, let me explain it to you. There's a special bag, a piping bag. You fill it up with the jelly. You stick it in. You make a little hole in the top of the donut. You stick it in. You squeeze the bag. The jelly goes inside. He starts explaining to the Rosh Yeshiva how they put the jelly into the donut. Very interesting, says Rosh Yeshiva. You can't see how much jelly is inside. How do you know when it's full? Right? How do you know you put in enough jelly? So he starts explaining to him how exactly how much jelly needs to go inside. How do you make sure it's centered? It doesn't come out of the side. Sometimes there's like a hole in the side of the donut and the jelly starts leaking out. And he's going through all the details. He explains to the Rosh Yeshiva exactly how you fill the donut with jelly. Wonderful. That's amazing, says Rosh Yeshiva. What about custard? Is custard also filled up the same way? It's a little different consistency. Maybe he starts explaining to the Rebbe, there's challenges. Jelly you have to do this way, custard you have to do this way. He goes through all the details. What about chocolate filling? And the Rebbe's going through. Then the Rebbe starts talking about the toppings. And they spend the next 40 minutes discussing donut making.
And then you get hungry.
Right? And Chaim, who's driving the Rosh Yeshiva, is very, very upset, right? He had prepared all of his Talmudic questions to discuss with the Rosh Yeshiva, and now he wasted 40 minutes talking about donuts, right? Isn't it? He knows it's a terrible sin of Bittul Torah, wasting time. You're supposed to spend every free moment learning, and he spends 40 minutes talking about donuts. Fine, they get to Yerushalayim, they drop off Baruch and Chana, and Rabbi Avram turns to Chaim and he says, now we could talk about the Gemara. You can come. We can come to my office. We'll discuss it. And he says, I don't understand. You're not going to waste even 1 minute talking about nonsense. And you spent the last 40 minutes talking about donuts?
These donuts are nonsense.
Right? So he says, let me explain it. Let me explain it to you. He says, I know Baruch and Chana very well, and I know Chana before she got married to Baruch. And Chana always wanted to marry a Talmud Chacham. She always had a dream to marry a big Talmud Chacham. But not always do dreams work out. She ended up marrying Baruch the baker, Baruch the donut maker, right? And, Baruch Hashem, they get along, but it kind of bothers her that, or she kind of, in a way, looks down a little bit at him for his job, for his profession. And I knew that if we would spend 40 minutes talking about, the Gemara, and Baruch would be sitting there quietly the whole time, he wouldn't be able to participate in the conversation, right? And his wife would be looking at him the whole time. He's like, I married a baker who's sitting here like a goylem when the two rabbis are sitting here and talking. I'm sitting here with this goylem in the back, right? So that's why I wanted to make sure that when I spoke about donuts, I told him I showed how much interest I have in donuts. So now they're going to come home and she's going to say, wow, Rosh Yeshiva is so interested in my husband's profession. It's going to help them out in the Shalom Bayis. So, of course, it's very important to learn Torah. It's a mitzvah to learn Torah every free moment. But in this situation, talking about donuts was a bigger mitzvah than learning Torah. So, l'chaim, we all have to realize that we all want to be holy. We all want to do extra mitzvahs. We want to do mitzvahs in the nicest way possible. But we have to realize that when it comes to v'ahavta l'reacha kamaycha, when it comes to making another Jew feel good, feel happy, sometimes you have to be willing to overlook the small, minor misspellings. L'chaim.